morning, everybody, and welcome to Baswell England World Social Work Week, where we present this event to you titled Digital Direct Performing Social Work Online. So, thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Digital Direct Performing Online. We are living in a technological revolution that has been vastly accelerated over these last 14 months. And, I think that for the integrity of the title of the course, it's really important to recognise that we're all trying to manage online activity at the moment. So if there are any glitches, just bear with us. We're working really hard to be here for you. So some housekeeping. Everyone who has joined the webinar will be observers and will not be able to verbally participate, but I will introduce each of our guests when the time is to. And if you want to ask a question or make a comment, just please use the question box and your comments will be filtered through to the Q&A session towards the end. And we encourage you to participate via the question box because your participation is really important. And after all, today is about you. So as we progress through the webinar, we want to hear from you. Some of you joining the webinar may already have some knowledge and experience of what will be discussed, or you may have questions about the information being shared. We want to hear from you, so please use the chat in questions box and get in touch, and we will acknowledge questions during the Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. We are encouraging everybody who is on Twitter to use that during the session, so please tag us. Baswell England UK, and if you want to tweet during the webinar, use the following hashtags: hashtag WSWD2021 or World Social Work Month hashtag. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin with the introductions. My name's Ian Thomas. I'm a social worker and Baswell England patron. I'm also what you'd probably consider an expert by experience, and you'll be hearing more from me throughout the day. And I'm here to host the event, and I'll also be doing a presentation. And Maris, National Director of Baswell England, is committed to high standards of social work practice and social work profession. Maris is a change agent who works in partnership with stakeholders driving collective engagement for positive change underpinned by values based on equality, inclusivity, human rights and social justice. And we have Desi Lindstorm, a care experience social worker from Calgary, Canada, and we will hear from Desi later on. And Heidi Henderson, a qualified social worker since 1997 in South Africa and has been working in the UK since 2004. Heidi has dedicated her career to children at risk of harm, currently head of children in care, care experience young people and children's resources at Dudley Council. I'm going to now hand over to Maris. Maris, welcome.
Thank you, Ian. That was a lovely introduction, and it's really fabulous to be here today. We've got a week of lots of exciting seminars, webinars, branch events, and I'll talk a little bit more about those shortly. And a real big welcome to Ian, Heidi and Desi. I know Desi's presentation is a pre-record, but really important again that we hear the voices of people with lived experience. And Baswell England is really committed to making sure that our events are co-produced and that we hear the voices that of people that matter. To begin with, and before I talk about the week's events, it's a time for reflection as well, and it's really important that in terms of our time together that we remember those who've lost their lives, their loved ones, their families and our colleagues, and that's across the world. And today it's also remembering that over 2.5 million people have died as a result of COVID, but also it's about the challenges and the injustices that social workers are advocating for and against in terms of racism, the murder of women, missing women, harassment, abuse, and we must stand united, both as a profession and hand in hand with the people that we work with, the communities that we serve, and the amazing people that have been showing their kindness, their humanity, and their connectedness across the world throughout the horrors of the last 12 months and pre-COVID as well. So we'd just like to take a minute for time for reflection, It can be for thoughts, it can be for prayer, in any way that you want to spend that minute. But it's a time for reflection for those that have lost their lives. So if you would all join us in terms of taking that time, and we'll let you know when the minute has finished. Thank you. Thank you. It's really important that we remember all of those loved ones. But this week is also about celebration. And we've had a wonderful earlier discussion with Heidi about the pronunciation, let me get it right, in terms of Ubuntu. And there will be different ways that we pronounce Ubuntu, but we were saying that's about shared language, commonality, and the beauty of diversity as well. So today it's about I am because we are. It's about strengthening social solidarity and global connectedness. And I think the last 12 months have really highlighted some of those challenges, the beauty and the kindness and the connectivity, but also really tragic examples of separation. And certainly when I think of things close to home, being separated from people and also loved ones, particularly in terms of people who may be living in community and residential care. Our branches and the network of BASWA, we're part of the International Federation of Social Work. And I think it's, again, in terms of our membership, we'd like to thank every social worker out there who has been working tirelessly, both in the UK and across the world, to support as many people as possible within communities, but also really thanking the children and families, the adults that have been supporting each other, the volunteers across the world, again, people that have been supporting in terms of food banks, in terms of making sure that people have access to water, to a lifeline of connection in terms of relationship-based social work and relationship connections. And our branches and communities of practice have been actively supporting that. So I think just to flag some of the work that will be happening in terms of the week ahead. We've got branches and networks across England who continue to bring together social workers in the spirit of I am because we are, and to encourage everyone to actively engage in local branches, mutual support, learning opportunities, and creating a stronger voice in social work. From April until the end of the year, we will be continuing to deliver workshops in a variety of themes. And for those that are starting their professional journey or returning to the profession or changing jobs in whichever context, it's about reaching out, it's about connectedness, it's about support. If you're looking to enhance your skills and practice, you can attend one of the online strengthening practice forums that we run. We've been providing safe what we call safe networks for social workers from across children's and adult services. And today, and there'll be some information in the chat line, also supporting social workers themselves who have been working in some really challenging circumstances. We're supporting social workers with a service called the Professional Support Service, and that's about connectivity. It's giving you the opportunity for individual time, one-to-one, to actually talk through professional issues, not clinical issues, any professional and personal issues that you want to. And we felt that was really important, again, in terms of supporting social workers who are working day in, day out to support children, families and communities that we serve. What's particularly apt about all of these services and support networks is that they're all in the spirit of Ubuntu. It's about learning together, developing together as a community and a professional community. Steph, if you could just put up the next slide, that will just highlight just a few of the events that we've got taking place today, which across the week. So today we're going to be having, obviously we're going to be hearing from Heidi and Ian and also from Desi, and it's really connecting in terms of the voice of care experience as well. On Social Work Day itself, there's a host of activities happening across the country and across the world as part of the International Federation, and we hope that you'll be able to join us on the actual day for a lunchtime of celebration with music, poetry and dancing. On Wednesday, we'll be holding workshops on anti-racist practice in the wake of George Floyd killing, with contributions from Mitt Joyner, the president of the National Association of Social Workers in the US. And on Thursday, we'll be launching, very sadly, very aptly, our domestic abuse guidance with contributors from Survivors, Women's Aid, the Ancraft Trust and Southall Black Sisters. The week will end with presentations from 3 social workers from India, Malawi and Zambia, reflecting on how COVID-19 has impacted on communities and how social workers have required to respond in different parts of the world, and again, the relevance of Ubuntu philosophy. Today we'll be hearing from Heidi and Ian and Des, as I've highlighted, from both their personal and professional experiences of care systems, both in South Africa, Canada, and in England. And just one single voice, you know, this isn't about representing the voice of all children, but it's about hearing personal experiences from people that I really have lots of respect for. We hope you all enjoy a wonderful event today, but also in the week ahead, and really celebrate World Social Work Day. Never forgetting our colleagues and the loved ones that are no longer with us, but their legacy will live on. And I know I've said that before, but I stand by it. Legacies have got to live on. The profession has got to shout about injustices. We've got to make that George Floyd's legacy lives on, and certainly in terms of Sarah Everton. And it's important that the voices of women continue to be heard and that our streets are safe. And it's something that Baswell will be fighting for very, very strongly. But today is now a time for listening and learning, and I'd like to thank you all for making the time for joining this seminar today. Thank you so much. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Maris. Thank you very much, and thank you for all you do in leading BASWA through the work that it does and social work as a whole. And, you know, reflection, celebration, social solidarity, which is a response to, you know, these issues that we're all living with today. And I think that social work is about a recognition that we care about people, and you know, you are testimony to that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so up next we have Desi. Desi is a care experience social worker with a rich and interesting heritage that is of huge importance to social work and the history of North America. Desi has shared with us a pre-recorded presentation, as right now it's around 2 AM in Canada. So thank you, Desi. Over to you.
Arlene, Ako wenzi mikasi na desna kaza Anishinaabe nin makwa dodam Gilma Takaiwak nin jiba. Greetings. My name, spirit name is Old Eagle Man. What I've done is I've just kind of socially located myself as an Indigenous man coming from Canada, which we actually call Mekanakanong, Turtle Island. Myself, like I said, I'm Anishinaabe, which is we're more commonly known as Ojibwe people. I also introduced myself as far as my family, which is the Bear Clan. That's like our bloodline, and that we follow matriarchal systems. So I follow the bloodline of my mother's clan, and so that makes me a Bear Clan member. I also said that I'm from what they call now, or sorry, back then was called the Place of Many Berries, which is now called Thunder Bay, Ontario. So I'm here today to share my story of my journey from being apprehended as a little boy to where I'm at today, where I'm almost I just turned 49, so I'm on my way to 50 now. So I'll just start at the beginning. My English name is Desi. I was born Desi Shababman. Shababman is a Anishinaabe word, and it means see through to spirit. However, I didn't carry that name for very long because I was born in 1972. And in 1974, me and my brothers were apprehended from our parents and placed into the foster care system. It's interesting because I used to have this nightmare where I was small in this dream, in this nightmare, and I was in this kitchen, and it's one of those kitchens from like the 70s, where you have like the kind of mustard yellow countertops and with that kind of material. I can't remember what it's called right now, but anyway, I'm standing there and I'm very small, kind of looking up, and there's a small window, and through the light, kind of, it feels like it's morning or something. There's some light coming through very faintly. And through this light, I can see kind of shadows of about 7 or so, looks like women standing around. And as I'm looking at them, all of a sudden, I'm being picked up from behind by something. And so I in my nightmare, I grab onto that countertop and I'm screaming and screaming, at these women and to help me. And I'm kind of slowly being taken away and pulled out, and then that it just kind of fades. And I used to have this nightmare all the time. And years and years later, in my 20s, or something like that, in my in my kind of early 20s, I'll get to that when I met my family. But it turns out that that wasn't actually a nightmare. It was actually what really happened. So that was kind of the beginning of my experience in the child welfare system. So being apprehended in that and putting into the child welfare system as just a little 2-year-old boy, I don't honestly remember much about being in foster care. My experience in the foster care system really wasn't that good. I believe that I had shut down and wasn't, as they say in neuroscience, and that I wasn't recording because I was in a stress response through that whole, those years that I spent in foster care. And then, of course, back then too, they moved children every 6 months because they didn't want them to attach, which today we know attachment is pretty important for us as human beings. It's a necessary skill for relationships, right? And but it wasn't something that I ended up not learning, that attachment piece. And so eventually I was adopted, which is why I have the last name now, Lindstrom. So I'm called Desi Lindstrom today. I was adopted by a Swedish family. The reason why we were adopted was because they had already adopted another Indigenous, my younger brother, and he saw us on TV, me and my brothers, because back in the 70s, that's what they did. They had TV shows or commercials where they say you can adopt these kids, and and so on. And anyway, they'd film us playing in these rooms and stuff, and apparently he saw us and wanted to play with us and kind of always play with us. So the Lindstroms decided that they were going to adopt us. And so that's what happened. So we ended up being adopted. That was after I was about 7 years old. So I'd spent 5 years in foster care, which, like I shared, I don't remember much of that experience. So being adopted by this Swedish family was again not really that great of a thing, unfortunately. Maybe I'm not entirely sure. Like I said, the reasons why we were told wasn't the greatest. So, like, I mean, as we're really just kind of playthings for their first adopted son. And over the years of that, it was a very strange relationship that we had with the Lindstroms. And you'll notice I keep calling them Lindstroms because to me they weren't really parents. It wasn't. I still didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like a family. Because I didn't really know what it was, because we're moved every 6 months. So we just never really, after a while, you just kind of give up, trying to make a relationship with anybody. You just don't bother. And secondly, you don't really know how either, because no one's really shown you, because of the experiences, again, the memories that I do have being in foster care, locked in a room, or where me and my older brother couldn't leave that room, and if we wanted to go to the bathroom, we would have to, there was a door to the outside, and we'd have to go outside and go to the bathroom, which I thought was very odd. This was in Montreal, Quebec, where we were adopted into. This is where the Lindstroms lived. And, it can get pretty cold there, again, -40 sometimes. If we were getting into trouble or something or whatever, we'd be put outside kind of in our pajamas on the balcony or something like that in -40. So very different and strange kind of ways of disciplining, which I still, I guess, I have to do a lot of healing from that too today. But anyway, interestingly enough, the way my brain was wired was that, change happened every 6 months. And I'll be honest with you, that continued on in my life, even when just, 10, 11 years ago when I got married. But only then did it really kind of change that constant need for change, right? I needed my world to change because that's what I was used to as a little boy, from 2 to 5, moving from one place to the next. That's how my life was. And if I didn't move on, then it became very uncomfortable. And I'd start to act out and stuff like that, and create scenarios where I would get them to, move Desi along, because that's what I was used to. And one of the instances, I guess I ended up like trying to set. They had a cottage, and I tried. I don't know if I was willingly or consciously trying to, but I almost did set it on fire. I didn't get moved along until I was 13, because of the trauma and that of that relationship, but also the trauma of the foster care system, that it caused me to have some addiction problems as well. So I started drinking alcohol when I was 12. And that's kind of when my alcohol was kind of at it. They just didn't know what to do with me, so they decided to just kick me out of the family. And interestingly enough, 2 years before that, my older brother had the same thing happen. He struggled too with addictions, and then the family just decided they didn't know what to do with him and just kicked him out. The same thing happened to me. And then I have a younger brother who's a year younger than me, and exactly the same thing happened to him. So within not a very long time, we were all ended up, kind of fending for ourselves. So at quite a young age. And so then this, of course, set me on a path, right, through addictions, alcohol. Alcohol led to kind of harder drugs, and all the while experiencing homelessness, right? And so that was my life for years, all the way up till I was 26 years old. And even within that time frame, when I was 19 years old, I just had this urge that I needed to find out, well, who am I? But the unfortunate part about it was that that urge or feeling I had when I was 19 was, I think, connected with the death of my parents. My mother, from what I gather from some of my aunts and that, the story was that when we were taken, my parents didn't last very long together with no children to keep us as a family. It kind of destroyed their relationship. And so they kind of went their separate ways. My father became kind of homeless and that, and was looking for work, but of course, because of racism, was really unable, which is actually, I found out, was the actual reason why we were apprehended to begin with, was because they moved from the reserve, Lactimolac, into Thunder Bay to provide a better life for us kids. And here we ended up getting taken and put in the system because my dad, no one would give him a job because he was Indigenous. So that's what happened. And he would struggle with that for the rest of his life, pretty much, in the eastern part of Canada there. So my mom got into, you would say, family violence relationships where she would date very abusive men and that. And eventually what happened was one of the last relationships she was in, the man threw her against the wall and then walked out of the apartment, and she experienced a brain aneurysm. And my father went to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I guess was staying in an abandoned house because he couldn't get real housing because he couldn't find work. And the house was somehow set on fire at some point and put him into a coma from smoke inhalation, which he actually passed away around the same time that my mom passed away. So short story, I wasn't able to reconnect with either of my parents, which was super hurtful for me because that was something that I really, really wanted, was to get to know my parents, my real parents, And I do have aunts and uncles, but unfortunately, because we didn't grow up with them, we're not connected, and we haven't been able to connect. They, for some reason, I don't know, I don't understand what it is, but we just still, it's been 20 years and I still don't really know them, and they don't really know me. I'll share with you too, I just lost my older brother, who was my protector and savior, throughout this whole, time in the system, really. He would always be looking out for me and taking care of me, even as a little boy, as a teenager, and even as a young man. But unfortunately, he just passed away from cancer, which I do believe is related to his own trauma. And so that's, there's been a lot of loss because of, being apprehended and spending time in the system. And not only that, but like I shared earlier, when I met my wife, she would she would get upset with me because every 6 months or so, I would change the whole house furniture around. And my wife grew up in the Blackfoot Reserve, and her parents were stable and everything, and she always lived in one place, and everything was always the same. So this drove her nuts that that I'm always changing furniture around every 6 months. So finally, she kind of helped me kind of make that change, right? And change that kind of wiring in my brain where it's okay, to have things stay the same. And that was a pattern, like I said, throughout my life. It was a different job, a different relationship, and then reasons why I couldn't be in that job or I couldn't be in that relationship. It took me all these 10 years just to finally actually learn how to love, because I had a very messed up idea also of what love was because of the examples that were given to me as a younger person, right? Like the Lindstroms and that, one of the last memories I have before they kicked me out was I was literally walking out of the house to go, visit some friends, really. And Mrs. Lindstrom walked me down to the end of the driveway, gave me a hug, said, I love you. And then the next day when I appeared, way maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, intoxicated, and then slept in and kind of was missing school. Basically, she just threw me out the next day, so it sends a pretty messed up message about what love is, right? And love is so, if it doesn't suit, where you're at or what, what I mean, then it's okay to just kind of get rid of it. So that's what I did. I did that in relationships, and I hate to say, but I probably hurt a lot of women. I know I have over the years, right? I had attachment problems. I had no understanding of love, relationships. I also had no identity. So just some things to think about, about the child welfare system. And to be honest with you, I'm a social worker today. I'm back in school now. I'm doing my bachelor's, my BSW. But it's taken me a long time to get here. It's not like, everything was hunky-dory and I got out, when I was 20 and got into education and stuff. That wasn't my path, right? And so, yeah, today I'm working towards, something, and I'm working towards trying to make change within the system of child and family services, because particularly in the Indigenous sector, because there needs to be a lot of change. I work to make sure that kids don't go through what I went through, because it's an interesting system, because it's unlike Indigenous thought, where we're thinking about the past, we're thinking about the present, and we're thinking about the future. It's like almost like in this field of children's services, we're focusing just on that moment of that child's life, right? And we're thinking that, okay, we're going to remove them from this situation, and we're dealing with that very temporarily, right? But the long-term effects of that we're not looking at the teenager, we're not looking at the adult, we're not looking at how that teenager or adult is going to function in society when they're missing a huge piece of themselves. I think that to close off, I thank you all very much, for listening, and I appreciate it. And I'd like to see, change happen, and I think it needs to happen. And we can't keep doing the same things over and over again, and expecting a different result, right? Social work has been around for a while, and we're still seeing the same issues, right? So there's something that we could probably change, or that we need to change. But anyway, that's all I have to say today. Thank you again very much all for listening, and I hope that that you all, that your families are blessed, and that your families are healthy, and that you all enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Wow. Desi, I hope you get to watch this, you know, and hear some of the questions that I hope will come towards the end in the Q&A, and I hope you get to hear, you know, what I'm saying now. I was really moved by everything you shared, and so much identification as well, you know, multiple transitions, rejection being a social response to addiction, you know, the Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same things, expecting different results. You know, the burden of caring, you know, the multiple transitions and how that impacts your attachment styles. And I, you know, I think a lot about whether social work education is conducive to make sense of that, or a barrier, or maybe there's a fine line. Yeah, Desi, I'm really moved by what you shared. Thank you. And I hope that we can set up a call at some point. And thank you, and thank you for showing up, because I think that you were authentic in what you shared, and you know, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so what a lovely prerequisite for me to go on to the next part. You know, I feel really honoured to be speaking along someone like Desi. You know, and here at BASWA, you know, organisation, I'm just going to set my little alarm on my wrist so I can keep an eye on my time. Yeah, wow. You know, today I'm a qualified social worker, and I think that there would be a lot of people, you know, from my past that would not have foreseen that, you know, and I stand here today against the odds, you know, if I'm honest. You know, and what I want to do is I want to share with you a little bit about some of my experiences as a looked after child and growing up in the care system, and then some of the challenges beyond. And I grew up, you know, in the care system, and social work has been a massive, massive part of my life, you know, from a very, very young age. And if someone said to me when I was maybe 10, 12, 13, 18, you know what, you're going to grow up and be a social worker, I would have fell off my chair, you know. Still can't quite believe it sometimes, you know. So and my story, you know, is one of, you know, abuse, neglect, loss, abandonment, rejection, and I guess I've probably built a career on the back of, you know, my experiences, and social work has helped me professionalize that, you know, and put a lot of things into perspective. You know, I come from a family that was marginalized and had a world of challenges, and you know, I think that although my parents had lots of problems, I think that what's important to recognize is that they had, you know, they were contending with, you know, issues, and they come from their own world with their own set of family systems, beliefs and values, and those were passed down to them, and they were working with the best that they had, and just like I am, you know, and I think that, you know, as human beings we must all be accountable. That's the way it has to be. But sometimes I think when you look at it broadly enough and you look back far enough, and you take into account, you know, all the elements in somebody's life, I don't know if there's always such thing as blame. I think blame can sometimes be quite a narrow paradigm to operate in: right, wrong, good, bad, yes, no. And I really like what Rumi says, that beyond all reasons of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I will meet you there. And we see the world through such limited lenses when we say it's good or it's bad or it's right or it's wrong. Perhaps it's neither. And perhaps, you know, when we think that way, we can transcend the limited paradigms that sometimes keep us stuck in ways of thinking that aren't helpful. And I went into the care system at 9 years old, you know, and it's important to sort of say what was going on inside, really, because, you know, we've all heard stories of children who have gone in care and through that system, and I think for me what's really valuable, which I got a lot from Desi's presentation, was kind of not just the external factors but the internal ones too. And he talked about his attachment patterns and stuff and transitions and every 6 months and how that, you know, impacted him. And when I was a child at school, I thought all the other kids got took to one side and was told, this is the secret for living life, but whatever you do, don't tell Ian. And I looked at all the other children, and they play and interact and talk and learn, and I was watching them thinking, how do you do this? I was at a complete loss, you know. And I remember asking a child in my class, have they told you something and told you not to tell me? And he looked at me like I was, you know, mad. And then I remember thinking, you know, they're really good at hiding this. I thought there had to be this class or this book or this lesson or this piece of information that would make it all make sense, you know. I now know that I was contending with a predisposition within myself that I was projecting onto the world around me. You know, and I was living with this sort of sense of outsider, you know. And not long after that, I remember local authority came to school, had a conversation with me, and you know, I never went home, and I went into a residential home. And the children, you know, would either sort of parent you or bully you, the older kids, you know. And I don't think a residential home like that would be able to operate under the circumstances it did now. And this was in '96. And I went through the care system and went into different families and residential homes and you know, all around the south of England. And what process happened for me was I wrote something about the burden of caring when I was listening to Desi. You know, when I would go to a family and I would move in, you know, I remember kind of I go there, I'll go up to my room, the social worker would leave, and I'd forget the blimmin' names of the family. And I'm sat in my room with all this anxiety thinking, God, like, what are their names? I can't remember their names because I'm so distracted by all the newness and the strangers, you know. And I think, right, I'm going to go downstairs and I'm not going to say nothing until someone says a name and I can get onto this operation, you know. And I'd be waiting for someone to say a name, and you'd be amazed that people don't use names. It's all tone and paralanguage when you live with one another. You know, you don't really call each other by your names unless you're upset, and then it'll be something else, and you don't want to adopt that. So, you know, and that's why, you know, welcome books are really important for children when we're placing children with families. That's why we have to leave a copy of the welcome book with the children, and we have to make sure they know how to read. And if they can't, then, you know, what strategies can we pick up to support them, you know. And this is social work, you know. And it was interesting. And then I kind of get on with the placement, and I'd maybe like the dog or the rabbit, or I'd like the park down the road or the kids in the area or something, you know. And none of that would come without its challenges. And then I'd start to build a relationship with the carers, and I'd think, actually, this might be all right, you know. But then what happened was I'd start strategizing. And we have to remember that when children, you know, come to us who have experienced separation, loss, abandonment, rejection, they come with a catalogue of evidence to suggest that you're going to leave them, let them down, hurt them, or abandon them in some way, because that's been their experience. And inevitably, they're going to project that onto the new experience because that's the blueprint in which they're working with. So when I would feel that this relationship was valuable, my ego would start strategizing, and it would start saying, oh, I don't know if they really like you. I don't really know if they want you here. And I'd start picking up on every tiny detail. And I would make it mean they don't really like me, they don't really want me here. And I would collate this catalogue of evidence to justify the belief systems which were the engines that were driving my behaviour, until, you know, this obsession would develop, and fear and anxiety of loss and abandonment would overwhelm me, and I would just feel so overwhelmed, and it would just create this compulsion to act out negatively in ways that don't always make sense to the outside world. And I would just go and I'd explode. And then eventually it would be like, Ian can't be here anymore, you know. And then I'd get letters from school saying he's a danger to himself and those around him. I read my file once and it said that I was socially handicapped and too violent for a family setting. And as soon as I sort of hit 10.5, I started getting arrested again and using, for the first time, 10.5, I was getting arrested in the residential / social care world. Response to my behaviour was to ring the police. And you know, and I guess I remember I had lots and lots of transitions, and I went all through the care system like that. And one thing I would like to identify is that when a placement would break down and I would be in the car with a social worker onto the next family, I'd often have families that were new to foster care that would take me. And I remember the conversation with the social worker went something along the lines of, you know, look, these are great foster carers. They're new. They're really down to earth. They always use that expression. They're really down to earth. And, you know, I really want you to behave this time, Ian, and try and really work at it. And I go, yeah, I promise. I'm going to really try. I'm going to really try. And if you put me up to a lie detector test, I would have passed it because I was telling the truth. But I didn't know that when I got there, those relationships would cause pain. The burden of caring, the burden of having something valuable in my life was too overwhelming for me. And you know, ultimately what I was walking around with was this deep sense of loneliness inside of me that just felt so inconsolable. And when I left the care system at 16, I was in supported accommodation that had sort of floating support, and my addiction had kind of really taken, you know, a toll on me. And I spent most of my sort of teens being quite sort of malnourished, underweight, you know, looking to change the way I felt, you know, and restless, irritable, discontent, all of that stuff, you know. And by the time I was 18, I was in custody, Portland Young Offenders Institution, and you know, I just kept going really. And I guess where it took me was, I was 21, I was sleeping on the streets, eating out of bins. I had a £200 a day crack and heroin addiction. I didn't have any veins left in my arm. I hadn't washed or changed my clothes for weeks. I was 8 stone, about 6 foot tall. You know, just scratching around trying to get money for drugs and robbing, borrowing, begging, stealing, everything. You know, and I'd been in and out of prison a few times already by then, and for me, you know, I just felt this loneliness and this sadness inside of me that felt so inconsolable, and I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know what was wrong with me, you know, and I just thought I was this terrible person. And what happened was I was in a police station in Brighton, and I've been arrested for nicking DVD box sets. It was hardly organised crime, and this solicitor told me that she used to have a gin problem, but I could still smell gin on her. And by now I'd been arrested like 35 times, and no one had ever really sat me down and said, why are you doing this and how can we help you to stop? Because I came from a category of people in community that it was expected for you to end up in those positions. People didn't question the status quo. You know, there's around 85,000 people in prison at any given time. A third of the prison population are former looked after children that we know of. I don't trust that data because, you know, predominantly middle class academics going into prisons to talk to people isn't the best way to engage them, you know. And having been through that, and I live with 20 foster families, several children's homes, 6 prison sentences over 10 prisons, 3 years of my life incarcerated, 5 drug rehabilitation programs. So I hope that I can speak with authority when I talk about this stuff, you know. And you know, and I remember this lady who was the solicitor, you know, she I can't remember what she said to me, but you know, the only thing that was holding me together was a slight bit of denial and that psychological coping strategy designed to keep us emotionally stable in unstable times. And the reason why I say slight is because mostly I'd given up on myself. I'd stopped trying to control my using. I'd accepted that this was my fate, and that means that nobody could hurt me more than I could hurt myself. And I remember she said to me, Ian, love, what's going on? Why are you doing this? And no one has spoken to me like that in ages. Like a couple of weeks before, I was sat on the floor outside a barber's, and the barber who owned the shop come and punched me in the side of the head and said I was making his shop look untidy and I was a tramp and I need to go. And, you know, and when you're in those positions, you're on Britain's scrap heap, you know, and people don't care about you, you know. And I remember this woman was so kind to me, and she was able to hold up the mirror with her kindness. And I remember I took a deep breath and I said, I don't want to live like this anymore. And so I, you know, and I said, send me to prison. And she said, you know, the prisons are full. And so I said to the custody sergeant, if you release me, I'm going to commit crime to buy more drugs. And, you know, and off they did. They sent me to prison. And I was really, really sick, withdrawing from all these drugs in a police station in South London for 3 days. And eventually I got sentenced for all the offences. And I remember I had this judge called Judge Brown send him down. That's what we nicknamed him. And I remember being on the wing on remand, and they were going, "Oh, he's a terrible judge. He's going to give you a massive sentence." And with the boys, and I remember thinking, like, pretending to be disappointed, but really I was a little bit excited, because I thought that what I should do is spend the rest of my life in prison. Because when the door shut at night time and I've got a meal and a book, you know, and I'm not out in the streets, I felt this sort of false sense of contentment come over me, you know, that I'll be safe. And when I used to get arrested and sent to prison, I used to feel this sense of relief come over me, you know, because I didn't want to live like that anymore, but I didn't know there was another way to live. And so, you know, and when they sentenced me, he gave me 3 years. And I remember thinking, well, what am I going to do when they let me out? And eventually I went to Camp Hill on the Isle of Wight, and I started having a conversation with the vicar there, and we'd have a tea and a biscuit, and he'd make me feel like I was a real human being, you know. And I had a ground floor cell and in Camp Hill, and I used to keep some of my bread and throw it out the window to feed the ducks, because there were ducks on the prison grounds, and in the summer there were ducklings. And because I used to feel something when I saw the ducklings, I thought maybe there's hope for someone like me. Maybe that, you know, because I feel something when I see those ducklings, I see their innocence and their need to be protected by their parents. Maybe I'm not such a terrible person. Maybe there's something out there for me still. And what they did was they reminded me of my humanity, you know, and for me, that's what the social work response is. It's a humanitarian response to human suffering. You know, if we reject people from society, we confirm the negative belief systems that they have about themselves, and the belief systems are the engine that's driving all that behavior. You know, if we put a baby in an incubator when it's born, and give a baby, you know, a nutritious diet to aid physical, you know, growth and development, but no human touch and contact, parts of the baby's brain won't develop, and in some cases the baby will die, you know. And we need human connection, we need human contact. It's really important. And I think that's what Gabor Mate talks about, the psychosocial model, where the biology of the brain is impacted by psychological and sociological factors. So when we reject people from society for being sick and suffering from addiction, you know, we confirm all those negative belief systems, and it's just feeding the problem. I'm not saying people shouldn't be, you know, recognize that they're accountable for their actions, but they also, we need a society that's accountable for the response as well. So yeah, and I come out of prison, and you know, I worked in a rehab. I got put into rehab. I started a personal development program, and kind of my life turned around, really. And I was in a community of men who had all experienced care, abuse, neglect, you know, and it wasn't a coincidence. And when we were shown kindness, care, compassion, given a sense of belonging, our responses changed, and we stopped using drugs, and we became productive members of society. And a lot of those men are still in my life now, who have gone on to do fantastic things, you know. And I think that it takes wisdom to see intention, but we're often judged on our actions, you know. And for me, social work lends itself to recognize what people's intentions are, and recognize the struggle. And it's important for us to, you know, think about where people are coming from. And I had a set of experiences as a child that meant that I constructed this way of seeing the world. And like, these experiences meant that I developed a blueprint, and I would see the world through that blueprint. And the architectures of that blueprint were connected to belief systems like, I'm unworthy of receiving love, I'm worthless, people won't love me, why won't you love me, you know, abandonment, rejection, all of that stuff. And what I've learned is that I've got to change the way I see the world in order for the world I see to change. And it's the same with people. If we change the way we see people, the people we see will change. And I think that what we are in desperate need of is authenticity, and people to show up, you know, to their experiences, and lead by example. And for me, I see social work as an opportunity to demonstrate that. And I hope that when I tell people that I'm a social worker, it conveys a message that I care about people. You know, and the last sort of 10-12 years have been fantastic. I've qualified as a social worker, I've been all around the world, You know, I've had some beautiful experiences, but one of the difficult experiences was relapse. After 4 years, I relapsed, and this is a really important lesson. When I relapsed, I came back to recovery support groups, and I injected heroin just before I went in, and I fell off the chair in the group, and my friend walked across the room, picked me up off the chair and put me back on the chair, and he told me that he loves me and that together we can get through this. And it kind of sobered me up. And this friend had been in care and the system and prolific offender and all those titles that you get, you know. And about 3 days later, I was going to 2 recovery support groups a day, desperately trying to get some hope back in my life, you know. And my friend phoned me and he said to me, "Ian, how are you?" And I said, I think I might be okay. And I could just feel the hope start to creep back into my heart that someone like me could maybe have another go at a life like this. And he said to me, "Ian, you know what? I love you and I don't want anything bad to happen to you." And he was from Southeast London and very institutionalized, and those words don't fall out of someone's mouth easily who's had a life like his and ours. And I said to him, "You're going to make me cry?" And he said, "Cry." And I just burst into tears. And in that moment, there was a song on the radio by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And in case anyone doesn't know, they're in recovery. And the Chili Peppers song was "Don't Forget Me." And the line in the song was, "There's a love that knows the way." And in that moment, I learned that love is the weapon of our choice. Because if you reject me, abandon me, condemn me, marginalize me, stigmatize me, all those processes that Neil Thompson talks about in 2011 promoting equality, the processes of discrimination, that means minority groups collectively are discriminated, then they become oppressed and their life chances are less than average. Care leavers and drug addicts are, you know, drug addicts are really hard work to work with, but they are still deserving people who need a lot of help and a specialist response. And if you had put me in prison and give me all of that, I would have, my ego has constructed itself to respond to that. I'm ready. But if you tell me you love me, you care about me, you don't want anything bad to happen to me, I've got no defense for that, because no defense is needed. And that's why I say love is the weapon of our choice. Now, my friend, you know, God bless him, Rob, who helped me that day, he relapsed and went back to prison via a back injury that the doctor provided him with Valium, and it set off his obsession. You know, an obsession is a thought that excludes all other thoughts, then creates a compulsion to act out on that obsession, causing endless loops of self-harmful behavior patterns, and that's the process of addiction. And you know, he went back to prison. I visited him in prison a few times. I tried to get him to my house to do a detox, and it was really difficult. And in the end, he hung himself, and he's no longer with us. And I understand why he hung himself, because he didn't want to live like that anymore, and I didn't want to live like that anymore when I was in that place. And I believe that society should have had a different response for Rob. I believe that he should have had a humanitarian response to his suffering. I believe as human beings, we all have to be accountable. But I think we have to share, you know, that accountability as a society to help people. Sigmund Freud was interested in understanding human mind in terms of its functions and processes and conflicts. The concept of ego psychology, the conception of self, is not something one is born with, but something that is socially constructed. So it's a conditioned response from our external demands. We're taught this. So the conditions cultivated for all of us must be consciously socially constructed, conducive to altruism, compassion, and practical steps that activate full membership to community, not rejection. As a former looked after child, having lived with around 20 foster families, several children's homes, and all those prison sentences, I'm now before you as a qualified social worker, and I've come to know a thing or two about, you know, what it takes to live a more harmonious human experience. It's been a long road, you know, and this was not possible without a deep and meaningful engagement with myself, utilizing various therapeutic and spiritual philosophies as a paradigm that is conducive to introspection and consequently a psychological and emotional equilibrium. Tall order, you know, but I'm continually inspired by the people I meet that advocate for the rights, well-being and interests of people that they work with and for. And Whatever the social conditions, political circumstances and agency arrangements, social workers must balance the daily intricacies of resources versus need, capacity versus working demands, and idealism versus reality. And we must continue to remember that people are much more than the sum of their experiences, socioeconomic status, class, interests, achievements, and mistakes. There is power in connection that transcends the differences, that power is the very phenomenon that binds us. And we are all as one. We are really interconnected globally. Separation is an illusion. I mean, can any nation, however powerful, stop global warming by itself? You know, air pollution kills 7 million people annually, and these are some of our biggest problems. Globalization has made people in one country utterly dependent on markets in another country. You know, in 2018, there were 68.5 million people who had been forcibly displaced. So the objective is for us to be connected and think holistically and create enabling environments for people to enjoy life, healthy and creative lives. And I believe that we have conflict, not because we don't, I think we have conflict because we don't understand each other. And we do not understand each other because I don't think we always necessarily understand ourselves. And as someone who has lived on the other side of the law, grown up on the margins of society, I'm passionate about how we view people. And thankfully, as I've said before, social work lends us to consider this. Someone commits a terrible act and we blame the individual. Although I believe as human beings, we must all be accountable for our choices. It's much deeper than this when seeking answers for cause and effect. If a plant does not grow, we don't blame the plant, we consider the environment. For example, irrigation, nourishing soil, light to aid nurture and healthy growth development. So why can't modern day society support human kindness and healthy attachments? You know, we do not become disconnected to war, addiction, violence, and inhumane acts. We have all of these things because we have come disconnected. So, you know, when we realize that connection, community, meaning common unity, are more important than separate interests, we are all living more fulfilling lives. And that's my contribution to this event. So, without further ado, and I'd also like to just add as well, you know, I stand on platforms and TED Talks and stuff like that and talk about my experiences. And I think it's really important that, you know, people don't come into social work because, you know, their lives have gone swimmingly well necessarily. People have been on journeys that have inspired them to care. And they don't always get the opportunity to be public about those in the realms of professionalism, etc. And I think it's really important that, you know, we all recognize that and continue to support each other in terms of our own mental health and our own well-being. You know, because even though I can be as public as I am about mine, it doesn't mean it still doesn't go without a struggle. And I recognize that, you know, social workers are really important people with really important jobs, and their well-being is really important because they are human beings too who are also on a journey. So I urge us all to continue to be authentic and caring to one another in a world that has become a very competitive arena and doesn't always have our best interests at heart. Okay, here we go. So I'm now going to hand over to Heidi Henderson.
Thank you, Ian. Can I say thank you first for sharing your story? It is really amazing, and I think I feel really privileged because today I'm here talking about people who shaped me throughout my life, because I said I love you, because I felt love for those people, and because they loved back. And not always initially, but always eventually. And I think for social workers, that's so key to hang on and keep hanging on, because eventually it is repaid. Every single moment is repaid. Ubuntu is the connection with others, but it's about humanity. It's about really reaching people around you and people understanding, I think, like both Ian and Daisy spoke about, what is going on behind the exterior. The people we meet in our careers are very often very hurt humans, and hide behind this crust of whatever is needed to keep safe, to keep themselves safe, even if it doesn't look safe from the outside in. And I think when we can reach that behind that crust and just think what can make this safe without the crust, then we're going to do much, much better as social workers. So if I can have the next slide, please. I'm Heidi Henderson. I'm here to talk about my social work experiences in South Africa, and I call it my Ubuntu years. And I call it my Ubuntu years because it's what shaped me as a social worker, rather than that's where it stopped. It continues every day. I think those of you who've heard me speak with Baswa on the 1st of December on World AIDS Day, when I first talked about Ubuntu, you might recognize it from then. So I'm not going to repeat myself from that time, but I am going to refer back to some of those experiences. Next slide, please. Right, so I was 16 on the 11th of February, no, 15 on the 11th of February 1990, when Mandela walked out of prison and started that long walk to freedom. He came out against a political backdrop. Those of us who lived there, I was privileged, I'm white, and I think that is enough to have been privileged at that time. I do not come from a rich family. I come from a very working class family. My parents were both industrial workers. But in comparison, in South Africa, there was a massive, massive divide between the rich and the poor, or not even the rich and the poor, between the working class and those people who were Black and marginalized. Poverty was enormous. Homelessness was unspeakable. Joblessness, they just weren't jobs. And if there were jobs, up until that time, those jobs were for the privileged white. The gaps in education was massive. You will all know about the Suweta Riots. We'll say we're causing it a riot. It wasn't a riot, it was a massacre where people tried to get educated in their own language. And because of a language barrier, there was a massacre and so many people died. HIV was on the rise. It's not peaked at that point yet in South Africa. Crime was unimaginable. When I arrived in England, I spent hours just staring out the window because there was no bars, and it took me a little while to get my head around it. What is it, you know? And still, even now, that's why I look so terribly white, is because I've got my desk facing the window. I like to look outside without the bars. And then because of apartheid, all our national resources were absolutely depleted. Other countries did not invest in South Africa. South Africa was sanctioned, and the little resources that were available, obviously, were spent on a very, very small group of people who happened to be white. Next slide, please. So in 1994, on the 27th of April, Mandela became our president, and the president of the new South Africa, the president of the Rainbow Nation. And there's always, what is it that's so inspirational about this man? Because at the time we were expecting possibly civil war. I think the whole country perhaps or the whole world were holding its breath and thinking there's a civil war coming in South Africa, but it didn't. And it didn't because of one man's vision. And what he said is, may your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears. when I chose to be a social worker at the age of 11, everyone told me that's a very, very bad choice. Here I am today, all these years later, still practicing, and I do not think it's a bad choice. Where everyone have the right opportunities to thrive. And I still hold that belief even now, many, many years later. Can I have the next slide, please? So what happened at the time, if we look at Maslow's theory, thinking about what is it that makes humans feel safe enough in order that they can continue to develop, reach the point where they are self-actualized, where they are the best version of themselves. And it's an ongoing and continuous point that we keep learning throughout life. But we need to have a full belly. We need to have warmth. We need to have our very basic needs met. Now in South Africa, having been both at that time classed as the first world and third world country, the first world had those basic needs, but the third world didn't. So a whole lot of social work had to be really turned upside down, where we could start focusing on those communities. And what's happened then in South Africa is the government made funds available only to organizations who would focus on community development. And whilst we did all of the other work still, community development was key. We had to get water to people. We had to feed the nation. And we had to make it safe enough that people can walk down the street. I'll have the next slide, please. So for me, as a South African social worker, I remember that starting point when someone gave me a very similar figure of a person who's multitasking and who can do everything. And that was really what social work was. My degree was a 4-year full-time, Monday to Friday, 8 till 6. And I had a couple of evening classes too, and every holiday we had to work. But it did mean that I got everything crunched into my course and had every opportunity. So as a direct worker for social work, I did everything from the therapy to clinical work to harm reduction, to being an intermediary at court, to bereavement and grief counselling. And I put in an example here just to kind of give the breadth of experience. And this was a little girl, she was about 11. Her name was Yolandi, I remember. And it's strange how these things can you're just going to remember them forever, a little girl's name. But she made a disclosure at school about sexual abuse. And she had mild learning disabilities. So putting things into context of time would be quite difficult for her because of the learning disabilities. And also to express herself in the right way could be quite difficult because of the learning disabilities. She also suffered quite significant neglect. And the disclosure was of rape against her father. And I was her statutory social worker, so I did an awful lot of work to unpick her story, to help put the context around for her, to build her understanding, to give her back some self-worth and identity. And in the end, we took it to court. I couldn't be in the criminal court, but she asked that I stand outside the door where she's giving evidence the whole time. And she did an amazing job. She was just brilliant. and she got 19 years conviction against her father. That was enormous for her. And we've done a lot of the reparation already, and the restoration, if we go back to restorative practice, of getting her to understand that what has happened to her was wrong, and that she could still have her dad, because she had this conflict inside. And she came out that courtroom and you know, gave me the biggest hug ever and said to me, Heidi, what he did was wrong and now he will pay, but I can still love him. So that to me was an amazing success, because we worked so hard to achieve that point. But that was like the pinnacle of my work, because I had my 20 children on my caseload, and then I had group work and community development. I also did supervision and intervision with some people that I trained, particularly in the sexual abuse field, because it's just such a hard field to work in. And then there's, of course, fundraising and education, because we were all non-governmental organizations and had to fill up our government grants. We can go on to the next slide, please. So I did a silly thing there and added some animations, and then I changed everything around. But anyway, so the first one of the big jobs I did in terms of community development was around rape crisis. There was a lot of work around rape crisis. So we set up rape crisis centers at 3 different police stations. Then we trained volunteers, all volunteers, as diffusers, debriefers, and then trauma counselors, and then also provided antiretrovirals that were sponsored from the States to rape victims, so that they could take antiretrovirals for the first 3 months after. So we would immediately test and then test again in 3 months' time, to hopefully have flushed the system of any HIV. Water is such an essential human right, but our disadvantaged communities didn't have running water, or there might be one tap at the end of the road somewhere, and people had to carry these really heavy, you know, buckets and buckets to get to their homes. So we did an awful lot of work to try and get that infrastructure there and get water, running toilets, water in toilets. That, you know, it's almost unthinkable for us in the Western world to think that even this country that was so rich, there were people who didn't have water and toilets. I say give a man a fish because of the saying, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. But if you give him, you know, a fishing rod, he's going to eat for life. Now, we did an awful lot of work then in setting up poverty alleviation projects, and that was anything from brick building to making shoes and making jewelry, but also food gardens, and massive food gardens that came out of a packet of sponsored seeds, you know, so amazing stuff. And I remember going on tour to check out some of our projects across the areas, and I visited this chief's house and was sat outside on this petrol drum and having a chat with the chief about the garden and who's coming, and you know, they're also getting it as an income generation, so feeding the whole of the community as well as income generation, and then trade for other things. And his little girl come out, she must have been about 3, but clearly he's never in her life seen a white person. So she come out and really initially quite apprehensive, and then starts sitting on my lap, and I had really long hair, and she starts stroking my skin and trying to figure out where is the paint. And I was wearing a very long sunny dress because it's summer, and then the next thing, she climbed under my dress to try and figure out where does the white stop. But equally amazing because she's never seen a white person, and this is a country where the white people had all of the power. So a lot of my work was around also HIV and AIDS, community education. working in schools. We did a very fun project on the Trolley Full of Rights, where we dressed up as clowns with this big telly, and working through the rights and responsibilities for all children, to bring that message home. You have the right to a home, you have the right to water, you have the right to feel safe, you have the right to education, you have the right to health.
Hello there.
Sorry?
We lost sound for a slight, right, small moment there, Heidi, but you're back with us now. Please carry on.
Sorry about that. So yeah, got the young people to got excited with us, and they went out and distributed all of the information about Millennium Home of Hope. And if we can have the next slide, please, then. So I talked about Millennium Home of Hope before. It's just a small children's home. It was a temporary children's home where children would come who was afflicted by HIV and AIDS. We would reach out to the Bush Telegraph. We would find family or connected people for them, and eventually they would be adopted. If we couldn't find connected people, we found other people. And I've said before that I had more adopters than I ever had children, and we had a 100% success rate in finding homes for children with HIV and AIDS who were sure to die. This was the 90s. Also did a lot of work on exploitation and criminal exploitation, and I think one of my best memories from that time was I was again the statutory social worker for the project, but I also did life skills development with young people that came from the streets, who all had some form of substance dependency when they arrive, usually glue. The police killed quite a few of our children who were really marginalized. We started with basic English, numeracy, and life skills, and my role was life skills. And it was always really great fun to develop a sexual knowledge for young people who've lived on the street, and it was always very fascinating. But in any way, so this young little man, he wrote me a letter, and I was at home at work, and I got this hand delivered, well, postal. It had to come through the post. So this posted letter, and the first ever letter that he's written in his whole life says, "Dear Sis Heidi," and all very formal, RE, thank you, and then explained, thank you for the life skills program. I also did some time in prison. I did not work I worked in the prison, so I'm saying I did some time, but it was probably one of my most forming experiences in understanding what goes wrong for someone to feel that they have no other choice but to commit a crime. I think I need to rush, and I'll just do my final slide really quickly because it is on some connectivity. When I was working with rape crisis, we can do change the slide, please. Work with rape crisis. I got called in to meet this little girl in the hospital, and she was in a very terrible state. I won't go into the details, but I arrived there. She was absolute shut down, wouldn't speak to anyone, sat on the bed, introduced myself in very basic Siswati because I did not excel at Siswati at all. You have different regions in the country, you learn a different dialect or a different language depending on where you are. So my Siswati was just developing, and she wouldn't speak, and she was fascinated by my handbag. So we unpacked the handbag, and she found my hairbrush, and she brushed my hair for days. I think every time I go back, she wasn't ready to speak. She would just sit and brush my hair. Now, for someone to touch and be touched after rape and sexual abuse is a very difficult experience. So we just worked through the hairbrush, and eventually, I think on about 5th day, she decided it was time to talk. She was 9 years old, if not younger. Thank you. The next slide, please. I think it just comes to, so what have I learned? Social work is a hard job. Ian said earlier about that job is so tough and how we need to really look after ourselves and think about what it is, why are we here, but also make those connections with our colleagues, with our friends, and make sure we stay safe, because without us, this job is even harder. We need to look after each other. Back to the relationship-based social work, the trauma-informed practice, the restorative practice, it all comes down to one thing: just you need to be the one, just you. We don't need all the fancy pants things. We don't need a lot of tools and a lot of resources, because you as a social worker is the greatest resource and opportunity for that one person to change, or to have opportunities for themselves. People are amazingly resourceful and they do find their own solutions, be that a bucket of seeds being delivered, or a hairbrush. Eventually there is an answer coming from that person who is central to the decision making. I go back to that use of self. We are it. That's all we really need. And I know we're constantly thinking about resources being cut off, but the key here is the use of self. And then lastly, I think every success must be celebrated. So Ian and Desi, your successes, it's overwhelming. And I want to celebrate with you, and well done. And thank you for sharing with us. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Wow. Okay. What a time to be in South Africa. What a time to be, you were part of a big movement, a witness to, massive change, and setting up social protection measures under, really difficult environments is, yeah. I think we'll probably end up talking a bit more about that in the Q&A section, because already some questions have come through where people are curious to how that's informed your work here in the UK. So, and you became a social worker in '97, and that was a year after I entered into the care system. So that's a year that's significant for me too. And yeah, interesting correlation. So thank you. I hope we get to get a coffee one day and talk more about this. I'm sure there's lots to discuss. Okay, so now we're going to go over to Q&A with all the people that are presented, myself included, Heidi and Maris, and we're going to take questions from the audience. Some have already been coming in, so that's great. We'd just like to remind people of GDPR and confidentiality, and kind of the responsibilities we all share when sharing personal information. So I think, is there a question to read out for you, Maris?
Yeah, I'd just like to begin by also saying a really huge thank you to yourself, Ian, Heidi and Desi, and I think it's been incredibly humbling and powerful in terms of what you've shared today. Really powerful. Although the focus of today is about connecting and the importance of relationships, there's also been stories and narratives about disconnection and in terms of life experience. And there's a really important question here, Ian, that's been on the chat, that's directed at you, and people would really like to hear from you. It was about when you were talking about the times that the different placements that you had, and also within the prison system, but particularly the placements. Did anyone ever try to fit in with you rather than you having to fit in with others?
I think that's a really good question, and thank you for the person who asked it. I think it's sort of double layered for me. I think that there may have been, although I can't grasp a specific example in my head. And I think that I have to recognise that a lot of that will be the way I was seeing the world at the time, as well as what was actually going on, and kind of the blueprint in which was my lens to see how things were. But what I would say on that is that we parent children under the sort of pretense that if you're good, you'll get good things, and if you're good, you'll get good consequences. And I sometimes wonder, although we need to recognise cause and effect growing up and understand that how we behave has an impact on the situations we find ourselves in, I don't know if that's always trauma informed. And, you know, I was in a workshop as an adult doing an inner child experience, and I remember saying to the facilitator that I was really angry and about something when we were doing like a role play, and the facilitator said to me, you know what, Ian, your anger is welcome too. And that just knocked me off my stool. And so what I would urge people to work with children is, you know, children don't just get a good fostering experience if they're well behaved. How unrealistic is that? It's about recognizing that their pain is welcome too, and it's about us getting alongside them. So if I was to give you an example about how do we adapt circumstances to support children, it's about recognizing that, you know, equality isn't treating everyone the same. It's about adapting the environment to give everyone the same opportunity. And you have to adapt your environment and perspective to give children the same parenting opportunity who've experienced trauma. Okay, I've got a question here for you, Heidi. Okay, so this is from a member of the audience. I'm really keen to hear Heidi's views and thoughts about how her experience in South Africa now informs her work in Dudley, miles apart places. Are there any are there any parallels between the two different communities? Are there very different challenges working with children in care, or are there similar challenges, Heidi?
Some different and some similar. I think humans are humans. They do come with their own experiences, but I think the basicness of humanity is the same. We all have a heart that feels, and we all have eyes that see. You know, I think the starting point is just treating people fairly and equally. The relationship and the restorative practice and relationship-based practice is the same no matter where in the world you go. The use of self in social work is essential, and it's essential to then be trauma informed and understand what makes that person tick and why is that person behaving. I don't even like the word in the way that they do, because they are telling us their story through their actions. And the moment we start doing that, then the rest is a bit easier. I think when I first arrived in England, the difference between rich and poor, the difference between absolute and relative poverty was, it took really a long time to get my head around it. But the difference between what is poor and what's rich in two societies did not change. You know, there's still that massive gap, no matter where if that is South Africa, in poor part of the country, or if that is in Dudley. And I think that lack of opportunity is still there for our children who come from marginalized backgrounds, who don't have those experiences, or who have Ian's experience of care. So for me, it is we really need to unpick and break that cycle to get it right for the next generation.
Thank you, Heidi. I just wrote that down. We all have a heart that feels and eyes that see. I think that's the universal thing to hold on to, isn't it? As human beings, we're all impacted, regardless of our geographical and political makeup, right? That's beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so we have another question here. What lessons have we learned, and can we learn from other countries on addressing poverty as social workers? So anybody that would like to say something? Heidi, have you got anything you'd like to say on that? Maris.
No, Heidi, happy for you to go first.
Okay, I think to start with, it's to name it. Is the starting point. It's easy to think because it's not, because people have homes and, you know, live relatively easy, and there are state benefits. We forget that real poverty is still there. Because it's relative does not mean it's not real. So that's the starting point. And I think there's a lot of work around societal attitude and how we as social workers need to influence that society attitude, by using our votes, by, you know, shouting about it all the time, by making sure the fact that people don't have opportunities is not about them. You said that, Ian, and Desi said that too. This is not about them. This is how other people behave, and that's how society around us behave. Maris?
Yeah, I think reinforcing that, but there's also, totally agree with that, Heidi. There's also something about social workers as social agents and how we embed social justice and ensuring that there is equality and that we are constantly advocating for that. And I think particularly in the pandemic across the world, you know, look at the recent debates in terms of who gets access to vaccines, the signs of hope, and who doesn't, and who can afford what. And I think there's something about really going back to our core roots, our philosophy, our value base as social workers. And I don't see community development as separate to social work. I think it's integral to the way that we work. And we've got to make sure that we do unite, that we do find voices collectively. And I think, you know, again, in terms of some of the recent really stark examples that we've had in terms of money and investment as part of the pandemic, and people that have been going hungry and starving, and people who have felt so vulnerable and self-harmed and taken their lives, and there hasn't been the investment in the community resources that are needed. So I think in terms of my message, it's collectively about how as a profession we connect across communities, across partnership with our citizens, and that we stand up and we get our voices heard and we support people as best we can.
Agreed completely. And on the international perspective, where I was working at the Martin James Foundation, it was an agenda towards deinstitutionalization, so developing foster care and family-based care in developing countries. And we were working in Madagascar, and when the pandemic hit, you know, it was a really good opportunity to work with the government as an NGO and say, look, we can help. But the you know, the things we were thinking about doing, if you provide PPE, people will sell it for food because food's more important. If you buy a load of rice and then give it out, you know, then you're a target because you have commodity, and then you also upset the rice market for the people that sell it and the people that buy it daily. You know, and what we learned was that we need to be working with NGOs, UNICEF and government and form a collective response to support people, you know, and to pivot our COVID response. And it was really complex. It's more than just sort of thinking about, okay, we'll go and do this or put some money there. There's a whole system, and the minute you enter that system, the equilibrium of that system changes, and you've got to kind of, you know, really strategize. Well-intended intervention isn't enough. It has to be a sophisticated one, right? You know. Good question. Maris, I think there's a question here. So I've got one. I can read it. So Heidi.
Apologies, thanks, Ian. Can't see it.
So Heidi, self-care is increasingly important during the pandemic. I'm wondering, what advice would you give social work managers to help keep social workers safe? And Ian, do you have anything to add to this? Heidi?
Oh, it's a tough one, isn't it? I think we spend so much time on here. We literally flick from one meeting to another. I think as a manager, you need to have some really honest conversations about, you know, what is it that's on offer, and are we allowing the opportunity for people to take what's on offer? It's all good and well to say we've got amazing resources, we've got, you know, I think about what we offer in our local authority. We've got daily yoga, dancing, physical exercise, as well as a different mindfulness.
Oh, we've lost you now, Heidi. The sound's just disappeared. I don't know if you can hear me, Heidi. Okay. I really don't want to talk over Heidi.
No,
I don't think.
hopefully come in.
To ourselves.
We lost you there for a second, Heidi. Are you back with us?
I think so. Sorry about that. I think we're not
Don't
very
worry.
kind to ourselves, and we really need to be kind to ourselves, and we need to take responsibility and make that time to stay healthy, and cuddle your cats or your dogs or your ducks if that's what's needed.
Yeah, completely agree. Being kind to self is, you know, I mean, so recently I've been doing more independent work, and I've been lucky enough to work with foster carers around leaving care and stuff like that, and community practices with local authorities where we get practitioners together. And you know, at the beginning of each workshop, I ask people to write down 10 things they're grateful for. And I ask them to send a message to somebody that they care about and express some kindness or a loving comment. And at the end of each workshop, we read those out and then share the responses of those messages. And I guess for me, what I've learned is that the world can't be a resource for me to feel better, unfortunately, but I can be a resource to make a better contribution to the world. And whatever's going on in my life, there's kind of 3 pillars I try and work to. So gratitude, which I can cultivate through the administration of writing what I'm grateful for down. Connection, which is really important in a world where connection is more imperative than ever because we're having to socially isolate. And service, you know, being of service, making a positive contribution, adding value to the situation. And I might do that by, you know, picking up some rubbish or sending someone a kind text message saying thank you for their friendship, I love them, I care about them, or just ring someone that I know is on a similar journey who might be struggling. And when I do those things, within an hour I feel better most of the time, you know, and it might not solve all my problems, but it contributes towards my own development and I feel more purposeful. So that would be my contribution. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions. I'm really sorry, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, social workers, and everyone who has come along to participate. I'd like to thank Maris for your contribution and everything you've done today. Thank you. Heidi, thank you so much. Fascinating. Like Dudley is lucky to have you. And
Absolutely.
and Desi, you know.
Thank you. I'm really grateful. Thank you to Baswa again.
And thank
as
you
always.
to you, Ian. Thank you to you.
It's an honour. It's an absolute honour. You know, it's I always like engaging with Baswa. It's such a fantastic organisation. So and Desi, thank you, Desi, for your contribution. And you know, we're sending you gratitude, love, care, you know, companionship, you know, and we're honouring you from across the water. And when you watch this, I hope you can, that lands on you too. Okay, so is there anything else anyone would like to say before we make a close?
Again, I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone for the contributions. And for me, it's really highlighted the importance of connectedness across the world and for people to just hold on to hope.
Yeah.
Hold on to hope. I like it.
Okay. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day and week and as we celebrate World Social Work. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.